Welcome to a world where flashing lights, cheerful tunes, and the hum of arcade machines mask chilling tales of terror. In tonight's video, we'll uncover 3 truly scary arcade horror stories, real accounts that transform a nostalgic retreat into a setting for the unsettling and the unexplainable. Arcades are places of fun and escape, but as these stories reveal, not all who enter find their way out untouched. Before we begin, I want to thank each and every one of you for supporting this channel. Your likes, comments, and shares mean so much to me, and it's your engagement that keeps these chilling tales coming. I wish you good health, safety, and courage as we venture into the unknown together. Now dim the lights, sit back, and prepare yourself. What seems like a harmless game might just play back in ways you never expect. Let's begin. Story 1: The Shrouded Gaze. I was 8 years old that October, and in a family of 4 siblings, I was the shy one, the awkward one, always trailing behind my older brothers Eric and Josh, who were confident and capable in ways I could never quite grasp. My younger brother Craig was blissfully attached to our parents, soaking up their attention like a sponge. That left me to my own devices to navigate the labyrinth of familial chaos in a world that felt like a vast, sprawling wilderness. We had arrived at a family resort nestled in the Catskills, an expanse of colorful autumn leaves and brisk mountain air. The trees stood tall and proud, their leaves a riot of reds and yellows, like nature's last hurrah before the cold crept in. The resort buzzed with laughter and the sounds of children, a cacophony that rang hollow to my ears as I watched from the sidelines, my heart racing with the thrill of an adventure I was yet to embark upon. The activity hall was my sanctuary. My brothers were off chasing thrills together, and Craig was safely tucked away with Mom and Dad, so I seized the opportunity to explore. As I stepped inside the hall, the atmosphere enveloped me, buzzing with excitement and the hum of pinball machines, the garish lights reflecting off the shiny surfaces like fleeting stars in a captured universe. I could smell popcorn wafting from somewhere nearby, the sickly sweet aroma that made my stomach rumble with the yearning for a snack. As I wandered deeper, I found the arcade, an expansive room filled with classic games that lined the walls like sentinels from another era. My gaze darted over the machines, their vibrant screens flickering and illuminating the dimness around me. Each game beckoned me with promises of laughter and competition. I fished a quarter from my pocket, heart pounding with anticipation, and slid it into the slot of a bright yellow Simpsons arcade game. The familiar music started to play, and for a moment I was lost in the colorful chaos of Springfield, swinging my fists at imaginary foes. Yet, amidst the vibrant lights and laughter, a chill slithered up my spine. Something compelled me to look away from the game, and it was then that I noticed a fogged glass door at the far end of the arcade. It stood slightly ajar, an invitation that whispered of secrets and shadows. Curiosity tugged at me, so I abandoned my game, the animated antics of Homer and Marge fading into the background as I approached the door. What I saw through the glass made my heart stop. The figure stood there, still and silent, staring back at me with a gaze that pierced through the mist. Initially, I thought it was a Halloween decoration, one of those lifelike figures you see at costume shops, crafted to induce a shiver down the spine. My mind reassured me, after all, it was October and decorations were everywhere. But as I squinted through the foggy glass, the figure shifted slightly, its eyes narrowing, a momentary flicker of something more than mere decoration. The atmosphere felt thick, almost oppressive, as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a move. I turned back to my game, hoping to drown out the strange sensation in my gut. The whirring of the arcade machines, the laughter of other children had all faded into a dull roar as I tried to focus on my game. The figure lingered at the periphery of my thoughts, its presence a dark shadow looming over my fun. After what felt like an eternity, I glanced back at the door. The figure's neutral expression had transformed. A smile stretched across its face, too wide, too unnatural, Panic surged within me. I stumbled backward, heart racing. The joyful noises of the arcade, suddenly sinister, warped into something eerie. I ran, my legs propelling me back through the arcade, past the flickering lights and the cries of joy that felt foreign now. I burst through the main doors of the hall, the crisp October air hitting me like a slap. I turned, breathless, scanning the area for the figure, for any trace of what I had seen. But there was nothing. No one stood behind me, no shrouded figure lurking just out of sight. I felt the pulse of fear thrumming through my veins, an electric current urging me to flee. Yet, I lingered, the remnants of curiosity battling the terror that clawed at my insides. I returned to the safety of my family, clinging to Craig, who was obliviously engrossed in a game with Dad. I forced a smile, but the memory of that figure lingered in the back of my mind like a ghost that refused to fade. My brothers returned, their laughter echoing around us, but I felt disconnected, the barrier of fear isolating me in a way I couldn't articulate. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the day's events over and over, the moment before the figure's smile becoming a loop in my mind. The darkness pressed against the window, and I was acutely aware of every creak and whisper in the house. I wanted to call out, to tell my parents, to share my fear, but what would I say? That I saw a figure smiling at me from behind a fogged glass. They'd dismiss it as a child's imagination, a relic of my overactive mind. Days turned into nights, and the vacation wore on, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The mornings were filled with family activities, but my joy was clouded by unease. Whenever I found myself alone, a shiver would crawl up my spine, urging me to look over my shoulder, to scan the edges of the room for that familiar figure lurking just out of sight. I kept my distance from the arcade, afraid that if I returned, I would find that smile waiting for me again. My brothers found new games to play, new adventures to chase, while I drifted through the days like a ghost among the living. Each time I caught sight of a shadow that moved just a bit too slowly, a fleeting shape in the corner of my eye, my heart would race. On our last evening at the resort, the family gathered for a bonfire. The crackling flames danced in the darkness, illuminating the faces of my siblings, their laughter a comforting balm against the tension that had built within me. I sat on the outskirts, feigning enjoyment, yet my thoughts spiraled back to that fogged glass door. As the fire popped and crackled, my brothers began sharing ghost stories, tales of lost souls and haunted places that echoed through the woods surrounding us. I listened, captivated yet terrified, my imagination running wild. Each story wove a thread of dread deeper into my consciousness, tightening around me until I could hardly breathe. I felt a chill in the air, a foreboding sensation crawling across my skin, and for a brief moment I thought I saw a figure in the shadows, just beyond the glow of the firelight. It was fleeting, but my heart seized with recognition. Was it the figure from the arcade, lingering at the edges of my reality? I couldn't take it anymore. I excused myself and slipped away from the warmth of the fire, seeking solace in the cool night air. The stars glittered overhead like distant memories, and the moon hung low, casting long shadows across the ground. I walked toward the arcade, the pull of that fogged glass door too strong to resist. As I approached, the familiar hum of the arcade machines buzzed in the air, growing louder with each step. I hesitated at the door, the fogged glass obscuring the interior. My heart pounded as I reached for the handle, the cool metal sending a shiver down my spine. I pushed the door open, the creak echoing into the night. Inside, the arcade was dark, the flickering screens casting eerie shadows on the walls. I stepped in, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I moved deeper into the room, scanning the familiar machines, but it felt different now, haunted somehow. And then I saw it, the figure stood before the fogged glass, just as it had before. My breath caught in my throat. It didn't move, just stared, its smile now wide, stretching unnaturally across its face. The atmosphere felt heavy, pressing down on me, the suffocating weight of dread. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the room with that smiling figure. Panic surged, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I pounded on the door, desperation clawing at my insides. "Let me out," I screamed, though no one could hear me, the walls of the arcade closing in, the laughter of the other families now a distant echo. The figure moved closer, its smile widening, a twisted visage that promised nothing but fear. I backed away, stumbling over a fallen arcade machine, my breath hitching as I pressed against the cold wall, eyes locked on that cursed smile. In that moment, I realized the truth: it was never a Halloween decoration. It was never meant to be friendly or harmless. It was a predator, disguised in the comforting guise of the familiar, waiting for a moment of weakness to strike. The room spun around me, colors blurring, and the last remnants of my courage drained away. I was trapped, alone, and the figure loomed closer, its gaze now more piercing than ever. Then, with one final burst of desperation, I charged toward the door, slamming my weight against it. It gave way, swinging open into the darkness, and I bolted into the night, not daring to look back. I ran through the forest, the cold air biting at. Story 2: Stalker in the Shadows. Dinner had always been a sanctuary for my family, a time to gather and share our day, the clink of cutlery accompanied by the hum of casual conversation. But that evening, something was off. I felt it deep in my bones, a tremor of unease that I couldn't shake. It began as I settled into my seat at the dining hall, my parents laughing and chatting as if the world around us was perfectly normal. Then I saw him. Across the room, at a table far removed from ours, a man sat alone. His features were lost in the dim light, but there was something distinctly unsettling about him. He looked almost like a shadow that had somehow decided to take form, dark and vaguely familiar. I couldn't place it at first, but a creeping dread slithered up my spine as I recalled a night spent in the fluorescent glow of the arcade. It was him, the same man I had seen that night, lurking in the corner, watching me play. My heart began to race, the laughter of my family fading into a muffled background hum. He was staring at me, and that predatory gaze made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The table felt suddenly claustrophobic, my parents oblivious to the specter that had materialized in the shadows. I forced myself to chew on my food, each bite becoming a battle against the rising nausea. I glanced again at the man, and there was a smile, wide and predatory. I could see it now, the way his lips curled up, almost too much, as if he were savoring some private joke at my expense. I turned to my parents, my voice barely a whisper, as I attempted to inform them of my growing panic. They shifted their attention, looking in the man's direction, then back to me, dismissing my fear with a simple wave of their hands. "Just ignore him," my father said. "He's probably harmless." But I couldn't. His gaze felt like a cold hand gripping my throat, and I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to flee. Dinner dragged on, the man's presence a dark cloud hanging over our table. Every laugh shared a mockery of my fear. When he finally stood up and left, it felt like a reprieve, but the image of that smile lingered, haunting me long after he vanished into the shadows of the hall. As the days passed, the unease from that dinner became a weight I carried, an inkling of danger that began to seep into my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that he had marked me, a predator sizing up its prey. I forced myself to dismiss it as paranoia, but deep down I knew better. Years rolled on, and the specter of the man at dinner faded into the back of my mind, overshadowed by the new specter that emerged in my life. It was a different kind of haunting, one that crept up slowly like the first hints of twilight, a girl named Alyssa. I had met Alyssa through Instagram, her posts filled with vibrant snapshots of her life, a radiant smile that beckoned me into a world I was eager to explore. At first it was thrilling, the kind of connection that filled the void of loneliness. But as we exchanged messages, her initial charm morphed into something suffocating. She was clingy, her texts incessant, filling my phone like a torrent. Each notification was a reminder that I had stepped into a web I didn't know how to escape. Despite my attempts to date other girls trying to coax some semblance of normalcy back into my life, Alyssa's jealousy began to bubble to the surface, her messages turning from sweet to sour, a tempestuous sea of anger lapping at the edges of my sanity. I couldn't help but feel trapped, caught in a game I hadn't signed up for. One night, as I sat in a booth with another girl named Meg at Dave Buster's, enjoying what was supposed to be a carefree evening, my phone buzzed with a message that sent a chill down my spine. It was a picture of us taken from a distance, and I could feel the icy grip of dread wrapping around my heart. A name on a burner phone flashed on the screen, an ominous reminder that I wasn't alone in this. I glanced up, scanning the room for signs of danger, but the laughter and lights of the arcade felt hollow, like a carnival masking a darker truth. Then came the second photo, this one taken from across the street my house, clear as day, looming ominously against the night sky. It was an unmistakable threat, a message laced with the scent of madness. I had to act, had to break free from this nightmare that seemed intent on consuming me. After that date with Meg, as I pulled into my driveway, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. The air felt electric, charged with a dread I couldn't explain. I stepped inside, the stillness of the house amplifying my fears. My phone vibrated again, another picture, this one on my front porch, the shadows swallowing the steps. I grasped for my firearm, a cold weight that had once brought comfort now felt like my only lifeline. I could hear the scuffling outside, the creak of the floorboards as an intruder moved in the darkness. Heart pounding, I stepped quietly to the front door, ready to confront the nightmare that had seeped into my life. I flung the door open, the light spilling out onto the intruder, a man standing there, his features obscured in shadow. For a heartbeat, time stood still as our eyes locked. I felt a rush of recognition. This was Alyssa's brother. Anger and fear surged through me, an overwhelming urge to protect myself from the storm brewing in his eyes. I raised the firearm, my hand steady despite the chaos unfolding inside me. "What the hell do you want?" I demanded, my voice sharp against the night. He didn't answer, just stood there, rage simmering behind his eyes. The realization of what was about to happen settled like lead in my gut, but I wasn't about to back down. In that moment, I had become the hunter instead of the hunted. The confrontation was a blur, a dance of shadows and anger, but ultimately it ended with sirens wailing in the distance. The police arrived, sweeping in like an exorcism, dragging Alyssa's brother away from my doorstep. As they cuffed him, the weight of dread began to lift, replaced by a strange sense of relief. In the aftermath, I found myself alone, staring at the empty space where danger had lingered. My heart raced as I sent a video of the confrontation to Alyssa, a desperate plea for her to understand the chaos her brother had unleashed upon my life. It felt like a closing chapter, yet the echoes of the past remained a reminder of the shadows that lurked just beyond the light. I thought back to that dinner, the man who had watched me from afar, and the terror that had lingered in my mind. The world is full of shadows, I realized, and sometimes they take shape in ways we can't foresee. As I moved forward, I knew the ghosts of my past would remain, lurking in the corners of my memory, waiting for the next moment to pounce. Now, every corner feels like a trap, every smile a potential mask for something darker. I learned that night that sometimes the monsters aren't just figments of our imagination. They can be all too real, stalking us in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Story 3: The Arcade Watcher. It was one of those gray, oppressive afternoons, the kind that hangs heavy in the air like an impending storm, dampening even the most vibrant of spirits. The school day had finally dragged to a close, and Connor and I decided to seek refuge in the local arcade, a dimly lit sanctuary filled with the sound of digital explosions and cheerful beeps. I always felt a certain thrill in the electric atmosphere, but that day, the stormy weather outside seemed to seep into the arcade, casting a pall over our usual excitement. We stepped inside, the door creaking like a whisper, and were greeted by the familiar cacophony of blinking lights and the distant sounds of laughter. But the laughter felt muted today. The arcade was eerily quiet, save for a few scattered players. I could hear the patter of rain against the windows, the world outside blurring into a watery haze. We shrugged it off, chalking up the lack of patrons to the weather, and made our way to the air hockey table. As we began our game, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was an unsettling sensation, like a shiver racing up my spine, but I tried to brush it aside. I focused on Connor, who was grinning wildly, his competitive spirit ignited. But soon enough, the sensation morphed into something more tangible. From the corner of my eye, I noticed a man lingering nearby, a figure that stood out in the flickering glow of the arcade lights. He was older, perhaps in his mid-30s, with a worn-out baseball cap pulled low over his brow. He seemed harmless at first, just another player interested in the games. But as I returned to our match, I could feel his gaze boring into me, as if he were dissecting my every move. It began with casual comments, playful jabs about our skills, but quickly escalated. Each remark felt more intrusive, creeping under my skin like an insidious vine. "Nice shot," he called out, laughter spilling from his lips. But it wasn't the laughter of camaraderie, it was something darker, almost predatory. Connor shot me a glance, his brow furrowing. I could tell he felt it too, the discomfort growing like a shadow between us. When the man approached, offering to pay for our air hockey game, I felt my stomach drop. I shot a quick look at Connor, whose expression mirrored my own unease. There was something off about him, an intensity in his eyes that made my skin crawl. I wanted to refuse, to say we were fine on our own, but the words caught in my throat. As we played, the man lingered, inching closer with each round. He began to touch my shoulder and Connor's back, a casual brush that made my skin prickle. With each touch, a pulse of discomfort shot through me. It was a silent agreement between Connor and me this was not right. The man was crossing a line that we hadn't even realized existed until it was already breached. The air thickened with tension, the once cheerful sounds of the arcade dulled to a murmur. I could see the storm outside intensifying, rain lashing against the windows as if trying to warn us. I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on me, suffocating. I looked at Connor, his expression tight with anxiety. We needed to leave. We wrapped up our game abruptly, a clumsy exit spurred by unease. The man called after us, his voice tinged with an unsettling cheer, urging us to stay. But we didn't look back. The door swung open, the blast of cool air hitting us like a slap. We dashed into the rain, the droplets drenching us within moments. But the cold was nothing compared to the chill that had settled in my bones. The echo of our footsteps splashed in puddles, the sound mingling with the distant rumble of thunder. I stole a glance over my shoulder, my heart racing. The red taillights of a car caught my eye, glimmering ominously in the downpour. My stomach twisted as I recognized the familiar shape of a red sedan, parked just outside the arcade. The man was watching us, his face obscured by the storm, but I felt his gaze like a brand on my skin. We picked up our pace, legs pumping, adrenaline surging as the rain continued to hammer down. It was a race against a phantom, an unseen terror that trailed us through the storm. Connor and I darted down the street, our breaths ragged, the pounding of our hearts a syncopated rhythm of fear. We reached my house, the familiar warmth of home feeling like a distant dream. I pounded on the door, frantically ringing the bell until my mother finally answered, her eyes wide with concern. We spilled out our story, breaths hitching, voices trembling with the residue of fear. I could see her expression shift, worry etching deep lines into her forehead. But fear doesn't dissipate easily. The next day, as the rain finally subsided, the sense of dread still clung to us. I spotted the red car again, parked a few houses down, the driver's seat empty. My heart raced as I pointed it out to my mother, her eyes narrowing in concern. She quickly dialed the police, the ringing of the phone echoing ominously in the quiet room. When the police arrived, they took our statement, but they were more focused on the car than our frantic description of the man. My father emerged, looking determined as he approached the red sedan. The rain had washed away the remnants of our panic, but I could still feel the unease knotting my stomach. He knocked on the window, his hand forming a fist, but the man sped off before he could even respond, leaving only a cloud of exhaust in his wake. The police took notes, but as the sun set and the shadows stretched across our yard, I could see that they were doubtful. The man remained a ghost, a specter slipping through the cracks of our reality. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events like a broken record. The arcade, the red car, the man's unsettling smile, everything twisted together in a dark tapestry of fear. Weeks passed and life began to return to normal. But the arcade, once a sanctuary, now loomed like a dark reminder of our encounter. The owner had sent out an email banning us from returning. My mother had insisted on it, a protective measure that did little to ease the terror lodged in my chest. I could still hear the hum of the arcade machines, the echo of laughter replaced by an eerie silence that haunted my dreams. But it was in those dreams that the man returned. He'd stand at the edge of the arcade, lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to turn my back. Each time I would try to escape, but the air would grow thick, my legs turning to lead. The nightmares felt like a warning, a reminder that some shadows linger long after the light has faded. It was a Sunday evening when I decided to confront the fear that had nestled itself deep within me. I grabbed my jacket and slipped outside, the crisp air biting against my skin. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the world fresh and new, yet I could still sense the weight of the storm in the air. As I approached the arcade, my heart thudded against my ribs. I could see the flickering lights from a distance, the familiar sounds pulling me closer, a siren's call I couldn't resist. I pushed open the door, the creak echoing in the silence, and stepped inside. The atmosphere was heavy with nostalgia and dread, a mixture that sent shivers down my spine. I moved through the aisles, memories swirling like ghosts around me, but the joy was tainted, the laughter of children now sounding hollow. I glanced around, half expecting to see him lurking in the corners, but there was nothing, just shadows that stretched across the room. I approached the air hockey table, my heart racing. It felt absurd to be here, to confront the very thing that had haunted my dreams. I set a quarter on the edge, the sound of it sliding across the surface ringing out like a warning bell. The game lit up and I took a breath, the air thick with tension. Suddenly the door swung open behind me and I felt a presence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. It was him, the man from that day. He stood in the doorway, his baseball cap pulled low, casting shadows over his face. Time seemed to freeze as our eyes met. A spark of recognition passed between us, an unspoken understanding of terror. My instincts screamed at me to run, to escape the suffocating weight of his gaze. But instead I stood there, frozen in place. Then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he turned and left, disappearing into the night like a wisp of smoke. I exhaled a shaky breath, my heart pounding in my chest. It was on. But the memory lingered like a bitter aftertaste, a reminder of the fear that had gripped me. As I stepped back outside, the rain began to fall again, each drop washing away the remnants of my terror. But I knew that the memory of that day would never fade completely. Some encounters leave scars that run deeper than skin, and the arcade would forever hold the weight of what had transpired. I took one last look at the flickering lights, then turned away, stepping into the downpour, ready to face whatever came next. As we wrap up 3 truly scary arcade horror stories, it's a chilling reminder that the most ordinary, joyful places can sometimes conceal the most terrifying secrets. Arcades, with their flashing lights, cheerful music, and rows of gaming machines, are often seen as a heaven of nostalgia and fun. But as we've discovered tonight, behind the flickering neon and the echoing sounds of coins dropping, darker forces can lurk, forces that blur the lines between reality and nightmare. These stories challenge us to rethink the places we've always felt safe, reminding us that fear doesn't need an invitation, it simply waits for the right moment to strike. I want to take a moment to thank you for joining me on this unsettling journey. Your support of this channel through your likes, shares, comments, and subscriptions means the world to me. It's your curiosity and bravery that inspire me to continue exploring these eerie tales, and I'm so grateful to have you as part of this community. Whether you watch during the still hours of the night or in the safety of daylight, your presence here keeps the channel thriving. As always, I wish you good health, peace, and safety. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones, and never lose your sense of wonder even in the face of fear. Stay tuned for the next video, where we'll dive into more tales that challenge the boundaries of the known and unknown. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, sometimes it's not just a game, sometimes it's something far more sinister. See you soon.